The winter of 1871 hit Montana territory like a fist wrapped in barbed wire. Cold didn't creep in gradual that year. It slammed down in early November and squeezed until grown men couldn't feel their fingers and cattle froze standing upright in the fields. The kind of winter that killed the weak and made the strong wonder if they'd miscalculated their odds. Elsie Rowan was 10 years old the day her stepmother decided she wasn't worth keeping alive. She didn't understand it at first, didn't grasp what was happening when Vivian Crow pulled the supply wagon to a stop in the middle of absolutely nowhere, miles from the nearest settlement, surrounded by nothing but snow-covered hills and skeletal trees that looked like they'd been dead for centuries. "Get down," Vivian said. Not loud, not angry, just flat. Elsie sat on the back of the wagon bed, her thin legs dangling over the edge, clutching the cloth rabbit her real mother had sewn before the fever took her 3 years back. The rabbit was falling apart now, one button eye missing, stuffing leaking from a torn seam along its back. "What?" Elsie's voice came out small. It always came out small around Vivian. "I said get down!" Vivian twisted in the driver's seat, her face hard as the frozen ground. "We're stopping here." Elsie looked around. There was nothing here. No town, no ranch, no people. Just the rutted trail cutting through endless white and the wind howling like something dying slow. "But now, Elsie..." Her father had been dead 6 days. They'd buried him in a shallow grave 2 days' ride back, wrapped in a blanket because the ground was too frozen to dig proper. Samuel Rowan, who'd spent his last 3 years married to Vivian after Elsie's mother died, who'd promised Elsie they were going west to start fresh, who'd coughed blood into his hands for the final week of his life, while Vivian watched with those flat, empty eyes. Elsie climbed down from the wagon, her boots crunching in the snow. She was small for 10, underfed and pale, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big that had belonged to some other child before her. The cold bit through it like it wasn't even there. Vivian didn't get down, didn't move, just sat there holding the reins, staring straight ahead at the empty trail. "You can't keep up," Vivian said finally. "You're too slow, too weak. You eat too much, and you don't do enough work to earn it." Elsie's fingers tightened on the rabbit. "I can work harder. I promise. It's already decided." Vivian's voice was calm. That was the worst part. She wasn't yelling, wasn't emotional. She'd thought this through, planned it. "Your father's gone. I don't owe you anything, never did. Please," the word came out broken. "Please don't leave me here." Vivian looked at her then, really looked at her, and there was nothing in her face. No guilt, no hesitation, nothing. "You got a canteen under the seat," Vivian said, "and there's some hardtack in that cloth by your feet. That's more than fair." She wasn't joking. Elsie stood there shaking, from cold, from fear, from the sudden understanding that this was real. This was actually happening. "Someone will come along eventually," Vivian said, gathering the reins. "Maybe." Then she snapped the leather and the wagon lurched forward. Elsie didn't scream, didn't chase after it. She just stood there watching the only thing connecting her to the world that made sense roll away through the snow, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared around a bend in the hills. The silence that followed was complete. No birds, no rustling, just wind and the creak of frozen branches and Elsie's own breathing, fast and shallow, starting to hitch in her chest. She looked down at the supplies Vivian had mentioned. The canteen was there, half frozen, maybe a third full. The hardtack was 4 pieces of bread so stale it could break teeth. That was it. That was what Vivian thought a child's life was worth. Elsie picked up the canteen with numb fingers, shoved the hardtack into her coat pocket, stood there holding her rabbit and trying to figure out what to do next. The sun was already dropping, maybe 2 hours of light left. Maybe less. She knew what happened to people caught alone in the Montana winter. She'd heard the stories around campfires, whispered by travelers who'd seen the bodies come spring, frozen solid, half-eaten by wolves, mouths open in screams nobody heard. She was going to die out here. The thought settled into her chest like a stone. Then, quiet as breathing, another thought followed it. Not if I keep moving. Elsie looked at the trail. Vivian had gone west, toward wherever she was heading. East would take Elsie back toward nothing, just more emptiness, more frontier, more cold. North and south were wilderness. But the trail went both ways. Someone had made this trail. People used it. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But someone would come along eventually, and if Elsie could stay alive long enough, stay on the trail, stay visible. She started walking east. Not because she had a plan, not because she thought she'd make it, but because standing still meant freezing to death before midnight, and at least walking gave her body something to do besides shut down. Her boots were too big. They'd been her father's when he was a boy, stuffed with rags to make them fit. They rubbed blisters on her heels and let snow in around the laces. Every step was clumsy, exhausting. She walked anyway. The wind picked up as the sun dropped lower. It cut through her coat, through her dress, straight to her skin. Her face went numb first, then her fingers, even tucked under her armpits. The canteen swung from her belt, ice sloshing inside it. She didn't know how long she walked. Time stopped meaning anything. There was just the next step, then the next, then the next. The sky bled orange, then purple, then deep blue. Stars came out, cold and distant. Elsie kept walking. Her legs were shaking now. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She'd taken one piece of hardtack from her pocket an hour back and forced herself to chew it, but her mouth was so dry she could barely swallow. The water in the canteen was frozen solid. Still, she walked. Somewhere in the hills, a wolf howled. Another answered it from a different direction. Elsie's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She'd heard wolves before, back when she lived in the settlement with her real mother. They didn't usually come close to people. Usually. But a small girl alone in the dark, stumbling and weak, that was different. She tried to walk faster. Her boot caught on something under the snow, and she went down hard, hands out, hitting the frozen ground with an impact that knocked the air from her lungs. The rabbit flew from her grip and landed a few feet away, half buried in a drift. Elsie lay there, gasping, pain shooting through her palms. She wanted to stay down. Every part of her body was screaming to just stop, just rest, just close her eyes for a minute. That's how you die, some distant part of her brain whispered. You lie down and you don't get back up. She forced herself to her knees, crawled forward and dug the rabbit out of the snow, clutching it against her chest, got her feet back under her, swaying. The wolves howled again. Closer now. Elsie looked around wildly. There was nowhere to hide. No trees big enough to climb. No rocks to put her back against. Just open trail and endless white and darkness pressing in from all sides. She started running. It wasn't really running, more like a desperate lurching jog, her two big boots slipping in the snow, her breath tearing in her throat. She didn't get far before her legs gave out and she went down again, this time sliding several feet before stopping in a crumpled heap. This time she couldn't get up. Her body simply wouldn't respond anymore. She could feel her legs, could see them there in front of her, but they wouldn't move, wouldn't push, wouldn't do anything but tremble. The howling was very close now. Elsie rolled onto her back, staring up at the stars. They were beautiful. She'd never really noticed before. The sky out here wasn't like the sky back home. It was bigger, clearer, filled with more light than seemed possible. She wondered if her mother could see her from up there. If she was disappointed her daughter had only made it to 10 years old before giving up. I didn't give up, Elsie thought fiercely. I tried. I walked as far as I could. The wolf appeared at the edge of her vision, a dark shape moving between the trees, low to the ground, eyes catching the starlight. Then another shape, and another, 3 of them, maybe more. Elsie's fingers dug into the snow. She couldn't run, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but lie there and wait for it to be over. One of the wolves stepped onto the trail, not 20 feet away. It was huge, shaggy and gray, breath steaming in the frozen air. It lowered its head, testing the wind, trying to figure out if the small thing bleeding fear into the night was prey or threat. Elsie closed her eyes. She didn't want to see it coming. The gunshot cracked across the hills like a whip. The wolves scattered instantly, vanishing back into the darkness so fast Elsie wasn't sure they'd been there at all. She jerked upright, or tried to, her body only making it halfway before collapsing again. Hoofbeats, coming fast, coming toward her. A horse and rider materialized out of the dark, moving at a controlled run down the trail. The rider sat easy in the saddle despite the speed, rifle still raised, scanning the tree line for movement. When he reached Elsie, he pulled up short, and the horse danced sideways, snorting. For a moment, neither of them moved. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of his face. He looked at Elsie like she was a puzzle that didn't make sense. A a piece that didn't fit anywhere he could see. "You hurt?" His voice was rough, low, not unkind, but not warm either. Elsie tried to answer and nothing came out. Her throat had locked up. The man waited a beat, then swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. He moved like someone used to being outside, used to cold and danger and things going wrong. When he crouched next to Elsie, she got her first good look at his face. He wasn't old, maybe 35, 40, hard to tell. His face had the kind of lines that came from weather and work, not age. Dark hair, dark eyes, a scar running from his left eyebrow into his hairline. He studied her with an expression she couldn't read. "Where's your people?" he asked. Elsie's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Gone," she managed finally. The word came out as barely a whisper. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Gone where?" "Just gone." He looked past her, down the trail in both directions. Looked at her supplies. The nearly empty canteen, the coat that didn't fit, the cloth rabbit clutched in her frozen hands. Something changed in his face. Not softness, exactly, but recognition, like he understood something he hadn't before. "Can you stand?" he asked. Elsie tried. Got her legs under her, made it about halfway up before they buckled, and she went back down. The man caught her before she hit the ground, one arm hooking under her shoulders, holding her steady. He didn't say anything, didn't ask permission, just scooped her up like she weighed nothing and carried her to his horse. Elsie's brain screamed that she should be afraid, should fight, should do something besides just hang there in this stranger's arms. But her body had shut down everything except the most basic functions, and fear apparently wasn't one of them anymore. The man settled her in front of his saddle, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her in place, and she could feel the heat coming off him even through both their coats. Her body turned toward it instinctively, desperate for warmth. "What's your name?" the man asked, gathering the reins. "Elsie." Her voice sounded strange, distant. "I'm Caleb." He turned the horse back the way he'd come. "You're going to be all right, Elsie. You understand me?" She didn't answer. Didn't know how to answer. Nothing about this felt real anymore. The horse started moving, fast but controlled, eating up the trail in long strides. Elsie let her head fall against Caleb's chest and felt his heartbeat, steady and strong, through all the layers between them. She was still holding the rabbit. She didn't remember later how long the ride took. Time had stopped making sense somewhere back on the trail. She drifted in and out, aware of movement and cold and the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats, but not much else. When she came back to herself, there were lights. The horse had stopped in front of a large building. Not a house exactly, more like a compound. Low structures connected by covered walkways, built solid and dark against the night. Lanterns hung from posts, creating pools of yellow light that pushed back the darkness. People appeared from the buildings. Men, mostly. Ranch hands by the look of them, dressed in work clothes and boots, faces weathered and suspicious. "Boss," one of them called out. "What you got there?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He dismounted first, then reached up and lifted Elsie down. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She would have fallen if he hadn't kept his grip on her arms. "Found her on the North Trail," Caleb said. "Alone. Nearly frozen." The men exchanged looks. One of them, older than the rest with a gray beard, stepped closer and studied Elsie with narrow eyes. "She hurt?" he asked. "Don't think so, just cold, hungry." Caleb's hands tightened slightly on Elsie's arms. "Get Rosa." The older man hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into one of the buildings. Another hand spoke up, younger, uncertain. "You want us to—" "What? Take her to town in the morning?" "No." The word was flat, final, the kind of word that didn't leave room for argument. Elsie looked up at Caleb's face and saw something there that hadn't been visible on the trail. A hard, cold set to his jaw, like he'd made a decision and nothing was going to change it. The younger hand opened his mouth, thought better of it, and shut it again. A door opened and a woman came out, moving fast despite her age. She was maybe 50, built solid, with steel gray hair pulled back tight, and a face that looked like it had seen everything and wasn't impressed by most of it. She took one look at Elsie and her expression shifted. "Ay, Dios mío," she muttered. "Bring her inside, now." Caleb scooped Elsie up again and followed the woman, Rosa, through the door into a large kitchen that smelled like wood smoke and bread and coffee. The heat hit Elsie like a wall, and her body started shaking violently, every muscle seizing up as it tried to remember how to be warm. Rosa was already moving, pulling blankets from a cupboard, setting a kettle on the stove, barking orders in rapid-fire Spanish to someone Elsie couldn't see. Caleb set Elsie down in a chair close to the fire and stepped back. Rosa moved in immediately, wrapping blankets around the girl's shoulders, checking her hands and feet and face with quick, efficient movements. "How long was she out there?" Rosa asked without looking up. "Don't know. Found her maybe an hour's ride north." Caleb's voice was quieter now, almost uncertain, like he was still trying to figure out what he'd stumbled into. Rosa made a low sound in her throat. "Her fingers are bad. Toes might be worse. We'll see." She looked up at Caleb. "She say anything? Tell you what happened?" "Said her people were gone." "Gone how?" Caleb just shook his head. Rosa turned back to Elsie, her hands gentler now as she worked the frozen boots off the girl's feet. "What's your name, mija?" "Elsie." It came out steadier this time. The warmth was bringing her brain back online, piece by piece. "Elsie, good. I'm Rosa. You're at Blackthorn Ranch now. You're safe here. Understand?" Elsie nodded, even though she didn't understand anything. Didn't understand why this stranger had saved her, why this woman was being kind, why any of this was happening. Rosa pulled the last blanket tight and stood up. "She needs food. Not too much at once or she'll be sick. Warm broth first, then we see." She moved to the stove and started ladling something from a pot into a bowl. The smell hit Elsie a moment later. Beef broth, rich and salty. Better than anything she could remember. Rosa brought it over and held the bowl while Elsie drank, small sips that burned all the way down but felt like life pouring back into her body. Caleb stood near the door watching. He hadn't taken his coat off, hadn't sat down, just stood there with his arms crossed, face unreadable. "Where are her people?" Rosa asked quietly, not looking at him. "Don't know." "You didn't ask?" "I asked. She said gone." Rosa's hands tightened slightly on the bowl. "Gone doesn't happen by accident out here." "I know." They were both quiet for a moment. Elsie kept drinking, pretending she wasn't listening, even though she heard every word. "You planning to take her to town?" Rosa asked finally. "No." The word came out the same way it had outside. Flat, final, brooking no argument. Rosa looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that Elsie didn't understand. Some kind of understanding, or challenge, or both. "The hands won't like it," Rosa said. "Don't care what the hands like." "The town won't like it either." "Don't care about that either." Rosa studied him a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "All right then." She turned back to Elsie and helped her finish the broth, then wrapped her in 2 more blankets and carried her to a small room off the kitchen. There was a narrow bed there, a washstand, a single window covered with thick curtains. Rosa set Elsie down on the bed and started working on getting her out of her wet clothes. Elsie tried to help, but her fingers weren't working right yet, clumsy and stiff. When the coat came off, Rosa went very still. Elsie's dress underneath was threadbare, patched in a dozen places, too small for her now. But that wasn't what made Rosa stop. It was the bruises. Dark purple marks on her shoulders, her upper arms, her ribs. Old ones faded to yellow, newer ones still fresh. Rosa's face didn't change. She just helped Elsie into a clean nightshirt someone had brought, moved carefully around the marks, didn't ask questions. But when she tucked the blankets around Elsie and smoothed the hair back from her forehead, her voice was very quiet. "Nobody's going to hurt you here," she said. "You understand me? Nobody." Elsie wanted to believe her, but she'd learned a long time ago that promises from adults didn't mean much. Still, she nodded. Rosa stood up and moved to the door, then paused and looked back. "You keep that rabbit," she said, gesturing to the torn cloth toy still clutched in Elsie's hand. "Whatever you got that matters to you, you keep it close. Nobody here is going to take it away." Then she left, pulling the door closed behind her. Elsie lay in the dark, wrapped in more warmth than she'd felt in months, listening to the muffled sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Voices in the distance, boots on wood, a door closing somewhere. She should sleep. She knew she should sleep. Her body was screaming for it. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vivian's face, heard her voice. "You can't keep up. You're too slow, too weak." Elsie's fingers tightened on the rabbit. She wasn't weak. She'd walked for hours in the freezing dark. She'd stayed alive when Vivian had left her to die. She'd kept moving when everything in her wanted to quit. That had to count for something, didn't it? The door opened again, letting in a slice of light from the kitchen. Caleb stood there, silhouetted against the glow, still wearing his coat and hat. "You asleep?" he asked quietly. "No." He stepped into the room but didn't come close, just stood near the door, like he wasn't sure what to do with himself. "You got people somewhere?" he asked. "Family we should send word to?" Elsie shook her head. "Nobody?" "My father died 6 days ago. My mother died when I was 7. There's nobody else." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "What about the woman who left you on that trail?" Elsie's chest tightened. "She's not my people." "But she was traveling with you." "She married my father. Didn't mean she wanted me." Elsie's voice came out harder than she meant it to. "Soon as he died, she decided I wasn't worth the trouble." Another long silence. Then Caleb said very carefully, "She'd tell you that?" "Didn't have to. I could tell." Elsie pulled the blankets tighter. "She was right anyway. I eat too much and I can't work hard enough to earn my keep. That's what she said. That's why she left me." "That's horseshit." The word was so blunt, so unexpected, that Elsie actually looked at him. His face was still hard, still unreadable, but there was something burning behind his eyes now. "You're a child," Caleb said. "Children aren't supposed to earn their keep. They're supposed to be fed and kept warm and taught how to survive. Anyone who tells you different is a liar or a coward or both." Elsie didn't know what to say to that. Caleb shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "You can stay here long as you need. We'll figure out the rest later." "Why?" The question came out before Elsie could stop it. "Why did you help me?" Caleb looked at her for a moment, and something flickered across his face, something old and painful, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "Because I know what it's like when the world decides you're not worth saving," he said finally, "and I know what it takes to prove them wrong." Then he stepped back through the door and pulled it closed, leaving Elsie alone in the dark with those words echoing in her head. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. This morning, she'd been dying on a frozen trail, watching wolves circle, sure she'd never see another sunrise. Now she was in a warm bed, in a house full of strangers, with a man who'd shot at wolves to save her, and a woman who'd wrapped her in blankets like she mattered. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. But for the first time since her father died, Elsie felt something other than fear settling in her chest. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was close. She clutched the rabbit against her chest and finally let herself sleep. Ipomed. Outside in the main house, Caleb sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee while Rosa cleaned up from the evening meal. "You know this is going to cause problems," Rosa said without looking at him. "Probably. People talk. They see a man like you bringing home a child. They're going to have opinions. Let them." Rosa set down the pot she'd been scrubbing and turned to face him. "I'm serious, Caleb. The town already doesn't trust you. Half the ranchers think you're too ruthless. The other half think you're going soft since—" She stopped herself. "Since Emily and the baby died," Caleb finished flatly. "You can say it." Rosa's expression softened slightly. "You know what I mean." "I know." Caleb stared into his coffee. "And I don't care. That girl was left to die. Someone needs to answer for that. You planning to go looking for the woman who did it?" "If I have to." "And then what? You can't force someone to take a child they don't want." "I'm not giving her back." The words came out hard. Certain. "Not to anyone." Rosa studied him carefully. "You sure about this? Really sure? Because taking in a child isn't like taking in a stray. She's going to need things. Stability, school, a real home. This is a real home. This is a ranch full of men who work cattle and drink whiskey and don't know the first thing about raising a little girl." "Then we'll learn." Rosa shook her head slowly, but there was something almost like approval in her eyes. "You're a stubborn fool, Caleb Mercer." "Yeah." He drank the last of his coffee and stood up. "But I'm her stubborn fool now, whether she knows it yet or not." He headed for the door, then stopped and looked back. "Make sure she eats tomorrow," he said. Real food, as much as she wants. And find her some clothes that fit. Whatever she needs, get it. Rosa nodded. Already planning to. Caleb stepped out into the cold Montana night and stood there for a moment, looking up at the stars. The same stars Elsie had been staring at when she thought she was going to die. He'd meant what he said in there. The girl wasn't going back. Not to the woman who'd abandoned her. Not to an orphanage. Not to anyone who saw her as a burden instead of a person. Blackthorn Ranch had been dead inside for 3 years, ever since the fever took Emily and their infant son in the same week. Caleb had kept working, kept running the ranch, kept breathing. But he hadn't been alive. Not really. Tonight, carrying that half-frozen child through the dark, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, something had woken up inside him that he thought was gone forever. Purpose. He didn't know what came next. Didn't know how to be a father to a traumatized girl who'd been thrown away like trash. Didn't know if he could protect her from a world that seemed determined to crush anything weak or small or defenseless. But he knew one thing for certain. He was damn well going to try. Elsie woke to voices arguing outside her door. The light coming through the gap in the curtains was gray and weak, early morning, maybe an hour past dawn. She lay perfectly still under the blankets, listening. Can't just keep her here like some stray dog. A man's voice, rough and irritated. People are going to ask questions. Let them ask. That was Caleb. His voice was lower, harder to hear, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Boss, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, Dutch, and I'm telling you it doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. You bring a kid onto this ranch without explanation, the town can go to hell. A pause. Then Dutch again, quieter now. What about the law? Someone's got to be looking for her. Nobody's looking. Caleb's voice was flat. And if they are, they can take it up with me. Footsteps moved away. A door slammed somewhere deeper in the house. Elsie pulled the blankets up to her chin and stared at the ceiling. The conversation settled into her stomach like a rock. She'd known this wasn't permanent. Nothing ever was. But hearing them argue about her like she was a problem to be solved made everything feel fragile again. The door opened and Rosa came in carrying a tray. She moved quietly, like she wasn't sure if Elsie was awake. But when she saw the girl's eyes open, she smiled. Good morning, mija. You sleep all right? Elsie nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Rosa set the tray on the washstand. Eggs, toast, bacon, milk. More food than Elsie usually saw in 2 days. You need to eat, all of it if you can. Your body's been running on nothing for too long. She helped Elsie sit up, propping pillows behind her back, then handed her the plate. Elsie took it carefully, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. The men outside, Elsie said quietly. They don't want me here. Rosa's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Some of them don't know what they want. They're used to things being a certain way. You're different. That makes them nervous. Should I leave? No. The word came out firm. You should eat your breakfast and stop worrying about grown men who can't handle change. Elsie picked up the fork and started eating. The food was good, better than good, but it sat heavy in her stomach. She wasn't used to this much richness. Rosa watched her for a moment, then said, After you eat, we're going to get you cleaned up proper. I found some clothes that might fit. They belong to... She hesitated. They belong to someone who doesn't need them anymore. Elsie didn't ask who. She could hear the weight in Rosa's voice, the careful way she said it. She finished as much of the food as she could, which was maybe half, and Rosa didn't push her to eat more. Just took the tray and helped her out of bed. Elsie's legs were shaky, but they held. Her feet hurt where the cold had bitten deep, but she could walk. Rosa led her to a washroom where steam was already rising from a tub of hot water. You can manage yourself? Rosa asked. Elsie nodded. All right, I'll leave the clothes on the chair. You call if you need anything. When Rosa left, Elsie undressed slowly and lowered herself into the water. It was almost too hot, making her skin prickle and burn, but after a minute it felt like the best thing she'd ever experienced. She scrubbed herself with the soap Rosa had left. Real soap, not the harsh lye stuff Vivian used to make, and washed her hair until her fingers were wrinkled. When she finally climbed out, the water was gray. The clothes on the chair were simple but well made. A wool dress in dark blue, thick stockings, undergarments that actually fit. Elsie put them on and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked different, cleaner, almost like a regular child instead of something dragged behind a wagon. But her eyes were still the same, too old, too careful. When she came out, Rosa was waiting in the kitchen with Caleb and two of the ranch hands. Caleb looked up when she entered, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." One of the hands, a younger man with red hair and freckles, was staring at her like he'd never seen a child before. The other one, older with a gray beard, the man Rosa had called for last night, was watching Caleb more than her. "This is Dutch," Caleb said, gesturing to the older man. "He runs the crew, and that's Tommy. They work the ranch." Dutch nodded stiffly. Tommy gave her a nervous smile. "Elsie," Caleb continued, "I need to ride out today to check the north pastures. You're going to stay here with Rosa. She'll show you around." "All right," Elsie said quietly. Caleb studied her a moment longer, like he was trying to figure out if she was really okay, or just saying what he wanted to hear. Then he stood and pulled on his coat. "Dutch, Tommy, let's move. We're burning daylight." The three men filed out, leaving Elsie alone with Rosa. Rosa waited until the door closed, then turned to Elsie with a more serious expression. "You and I need to talk." Elsie's stomach tightened. Here it came. The conditions. The rules. The reasons why she couldn't stay. Rosa pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Elsie to do the same. "I'm not going to lie to you. This situation is complicated. Caleb's a good man, but he's got enemies, people who'd like nothing more than to see him stumble. You being here gives them ammunition." "I didn't ask to be here," Elsie said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I know, that's not what I'm saying." Rosa leaned forward. "What I'm saying is you need to understand what you walked into. Blackthorn Ranch isn't just a ranch, it's the biggest operation in the territory. Caleb built it from nothing after the war, fought off rustlers and rival ranchers in hard winters that killed everyone else. People respect him. They also fear him, and some of them hate him for being better at this than they are." Elsie listened, trying to follow. "You being here is going to raise questions," Rosa continued. "Where you came from, why Caleb took you in, whether it's proper for a single man to have a child living under his roof. People talk, and talk turns into rumors, and rumors turn into problems. So I should leave." "No." Rosa's voice was firm. "I'm telling you this so you know what's coming, so you're not blindsided when people start whispering or when someone shows up asking questions you don't want to answer." Elsie looked down at her hands, folded tight in her lap. "What should I say if someone asks?" "The truth. That your father died and you had nowhere else to go. That Caleb found you and brought you here. That's all anyone needs to know." "What about Vivian?" Rosa's expression hardened slightly. "What about her? She might come back. Might want—" Elsie couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Vivian showing up, claiming her, dragging her away from the first place that felt remotely safe. It made her chest tight. "If she comes back," Rosa said quietly, "Caleb will handle it. You don't worry about that woman. You worry about getting strong again, eating, resting, learning how things work here." Elsie nodded, not entirely convinced, but not knowing what else to do. Rosa stood up. "Come on, let me show you the ranch." They spent the morning walking through the compound. The main house was bigger than Elsie had realized, a sprawling structure with wings added on over the years as the ranch grew. There was the kitchen where Rosa worked, a dining hall where the hands ate, a parlor that looked like it hadn't been used in years, and several bedrooms upstairs. "Caleb stays in the east wing," Rosa explained. "The hands have the bunkhouse out back. You'll stay in that room off the kitchen for now. It's close if you need anything at night." "Where do you stay?" Elsie asked. "I have a room upstairs. Been here almost as long as Caleb." Rosa's voice carried a note of pride. "Came on when he first built the place. Back then it was just him and a handful of men trying to keep cattle alive through the winter." "You've been here a long time. Long enough to see this place grow from nothing into something that matters." Rosa glanced at her. "Long enough to know when something's worth fighting for." They walked out to the corrals where horses stamped and snorted in the cold air. Elsie had seen horses before, but never this many. There had to be at least 20 in the main corral alone. "You know how to ride?" Rosa asked. "A little. My father taught me when I was small." "Good. Out here, you need to know. Can't get anywhere on foot. Rosa pointed to a smaller horse, brown with a white blaze on its forehead. That one's gentle. Once you get your strength back, someone can teach you proper. They moved on to the barns, the storage sheds, the smithy where a huge man was hammering iron into horseshoes. He looked up when they passed, nodded at Rosa, stared at Elsie with open curiosity. That's Marcus, Rosa said. He doesn't talk much, but he's good at his work. You need something fixed, you ask him. Elsie filed the information away, trying to map the ranch in her head. Who did what? Where things were. How to navigate this place that felt both enormous and strangely contained. When they got back to the kitchen, Rosa set her to work peeling potatoes. Simple work, but it gave Elsie something to do with her hands while Rosa prepared the midday meal. You ever cooked before? Rosa asked. Some. My mother taught me before she died. After that, Vivian made me do most of it. Good. You can help me then. I feed 15 men 3 times a day. Extra hands are always useful. They worked in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds the scrape of knives on potatoes and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Then Rosa said, carefully, Caleb lost his wife and baby 3 years back. Fever took them both in the same week. Elsie's hand stilled. I didn't know. Not many people do. He doesn't talk about it, but that's why the house feels empty, like it's waiting for something that's never coming back. Elsie thought about that, about the unused parlor, the careful way Caleb moved through the house like he was trying not to disturb ghosts. Is that why he helped me? She asked quietly. Because he lost his own child. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Maybe. Or maybe he just couldn't ride past a little girl dying on the trail without doing something about it. Caleb's hard, but he's not cruel. There's a difference. The door banged open and Tommy came in, stomping snow off his boots. He stopped when he saw Elsie, like he'd forgotten she existed, then nodded awkwardly. Rosa, Dutch wants to know if you got extra coffee. We're running low in the bunkhouse. Take the tin on the second shelf, Rosa said without looking up. And tell Dutch if he and the boys would stop drinking it like water, maybe it would last longer. Tommy grinned, grabbed the tin, and left. He seems nice, Elsie said. Tommy's young, still thinks everything's an adventure. Rosa dumped the peeled potatoes into a pot. Give him a few more winters out here, and he'll learn better. The afternoon passed in similar fashion. Rosa teaching, Elsie learning, how to keep the stove at the right temperature, how to tell when bread was ready to come out of the oven. Small things, practical things, but they made Elsie feel useful in a way she hadn't felt in years. When the men came back that evening, they tracked snow and cold through the kitchen. Caleb was last through the door, his face red from wind, ice in his beard. It's getting worse out there, he said to Rosa. Storm coming, maybe 2-3 days. We got enough supplies? Should, long as we don't get snowed in longer than a week. Rosa nodded and started dishing out stew. The hands filed through, grabbing bowls, heading to the dining hall. Caleb hung back, pulling off his gloves, his eyes finding Elsie almost immediately. You doing all right? He asked. Yes? He studied her, like he was checking for cracks. Rosa treating you well? She's teaching me to cook. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. That right? She's a quick learner, Rosa said, handing Caleb a bowl. Smart, too. Picks things up fast. Caleb took the bowl but didn't move toward the dining hall. Elsie, come eat with us. You need to meet the rest of the crew. Elsie's stomach clenched. The thought of sitting in a room full of strange men, all of them staring at her, judging whether she belonged. Go on, Rosa said gently. They won't bite. Elsie followed Caleb to the dining hall, a long room with 2 heavy tables and benches. The hands were already seated, talking and eating. When Caleb walked in with Elsie behind him, the conversation died. This is Elsie, Caleb said simply. She's staying here. Anyone has a problem with that, they can talk to me after dinner. Nobody said anything. Caleb sat at the head of one table and gestured for Elsie to sit beside him. She did, feeling every eye in the room on her, and picked up her spoon with shaking hands. Slowly, the conversation started up again. The men talked about cattle, about the weather, about fence repairs needed before the storm hit. They didn't talk to Elsie, but they didn't ignore her either. They just let her be there. Dutch sat across from her, eating methodically, his eyes occasionally flicking to Caleb like he was trying to figure something out. Finally, he said, Kid know how to shoot? Caleb looked at him. She's 10. Old enough. Out here, everyone should know how to handle a gun. I can learn, Elsie said quietly. The words surprised her, but once they were out, she didn't take them back. Dutch raised an eyebrow. Caleb looked at her, considering. Maybe, Caleb said finally, when you're stronger. The meal continued. Elsie ate slowly, listening to the rhythm of the conversation, the easy way these men talked to each other. Like a family, almost. Rough and blunt, but familiar. After dinner, she helped Rosa clean up while the men headed back to the bunkhouse. Caleb stayed, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring into the fire. Boss is thinking hard about something, Rosa murmured to Elsie. Best to let him work it out. When the kitchen was clean, Rosa sent Elsie to bed, but Elsie paused in the doorway to her room, looking back at Caleb. Thank you, she said, for letting me stay. He looked up, surprised. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. Caleb set down his cup. Elsie, I'm not doing you a favor. It's the right thing, that's all. Vivian said there's no such thing as right, just what people can get away with. Caleb's expression darkened. Vivian was wrong about a lot of things. Elsie wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe there were people in the world who did right things because they were right, not because they got something out of it. But believing was harder than wanting. She went to her room and closed the door. The storm hit 2 days later. It came down like a hammer, turning the world outside white and howling. The ranch hands battened down everything they could, moved the horses into the barn, secured the shutters. Then they hunkered down to wait it out. Elsie had never seen snow like this. It piled against the windows, drifted against the doors, turned the entire compound into a fortress cut off from the rest of the world. The men stayed in the bunkhouse mostly, coming to the kitchen only for meals. Elsie spent her time with Rosa, learning more about cooking, about managing supplies, about the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. On the third day, when the storm showed no signs of stopping, Caleb came into the kitchen and found Elsie reading one of the books Rosa had dug out of storage. You can read, he said. Not a question. My mother taught me. He nodded slowly. Good. That'll help. Help with what? With everything. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her. Elsie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Her stomach tightened. All right. That woman who left you on the trail, Vivian, what's her full name? Vivian Crow. She married my father last name, but she kept using Crow most of the time. Where was she heading? West. Someplace called Helena. She said there was work there. Caleb's jaw tightened. You know anyone else traveling with her? Anyone who might have seen what she did? There were other wagons on the trail. We weren't alone most of the way. But after my father died, Vivian started falling back, putting distance between us and the others. By the time she left me, we hadn't seen another wagon in 2 days. So no witnesses? Elsie shook her head. Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. If she makes it to Helena, if she settles there, and if someone asks about you, she'll lie, Elsie finished. She'll say I died, or ran off, or something that makes it not her fault. Probably. So what do we do? Caleb looked at her directly. We tell the truth. If anyone comes asking, we tell them exactly what happened. That your father died, that Vivian abandoned you, that I found you half frozen and brought you here. Simple as that. And if she comes back, if she wants, she won't get you. Caleb's voice was hard, certain. I don't care what legal right she thinks she has. She threw you away. She doesn't get to change her mind. Elsie wanted to believe him, but she'd learned that what people said and what actually happened were often very different things. You don't trust me, Caleb said, reading her expression. That's all right. Trust takes time, but I need you to understand something. I've built this ranch through 2 decades of the worst this territory could throw at me. Indians, outlaws, blizzards, droughts, rival ranchers trying to burn me out. I'm still here, still standing. You think I'm going to let one cruel woman undo that? Put that way, it sounded almost reasonable. Okay, Elsie said quietly. Caleb nodded and stood up. Storm should break tomorrow. When it does, I'm riding to town. There's a marshal there, name's Garrett. Known him for years. I'm going to tell him what happened. Get it on record. That way, if anyone comes looking, there's a paper trail. Will that help? Maybe. Maybe not. But it's better than staying quiet and hoping nobody asks questions. He left, and Elsie went back to her book, but the words swam on the page. Her mind was too full of other things. Vivian's face. The cold trail. The wolves. Caleb's voice saying she doesn't get to change her mind. That night, Elsie woke to shouting. She sat up fast, heart hammering, the blankets twisted around her legs. The voices were coming from outside. Men yelling, running footsteps, the sharp whinny of frightened horses. She scrambled out of bed and cracked open her door. The kitchen was dark except for the dying fire in the stove. Rosa's door was open, her room empty. Elsie pulled on her boots and coat and went outside. The storm had stopped. The sky was clear and full of stars, the air so cold it burned her lungs. Snow was piled everywhere, knee-deep in places, glittering in the moonlight. The shouting was coming from the barn. Elsie ran toward it, slipping and stumbling in the snow, her breath making clouds in the frozen air. She reached the barn and pushed through the door into chaos. Half the horses were loose, crashing around in panic. Men were trying to corner them, calm them, get them back into stalls. Caleb was in the middle of it all, holding a rope, his voice cutting through the noise. "Tommy, get the door! Dutch, watch the left side! Marcus, help me with this one!" Elsie pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way. It took 20 minutes of controlled chaos before the horses were secured again, snorting and stamping, but no longer trying to break down the walls. Caleb handed his rope to Dutch and turned, wiping sweat from his face despite the cold. That's when he saw Elsie. "What are you doing out here?" "I heard shouting. I thought, get back to the house. It's freezing." "What happened?" Caleb looked at the damaged stall door hanging from one hinge. "Mountain lion, probably. Got close enough to spook them. They broke out trying to get away from the smell." "Is it still out there?" "If it is, it's long gone by now. Cats don't stick around when there's this much noise." He ushered her toward the door. "Go on. Back inside." Rosa met them halfway to the house, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her face tight with worry. "Everyone all right?" "Fine," Caleb said. "Horses got spooked, but nobody's hurt." "Elsie, what are you doing out here?" "I wanted to help," Elsie said, knowing how stupid it sounded. Rosa's expression softened slightly. "Next time, stay inside unless someone tells you otherwise. Running toward danger isn't helping. It's adding one more person to worry about." Elsie felt her face flush. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just be smarter." Rosa turned to Caleb. "You need anything?" "No. Get the kid back to bed before she freezes." Rosa guided Elsie back to the house, sat her down by the stove, and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "You're shaking." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're scared and cold and you just saw something you didn't understand." Rosa poured hot water from the kettle and made tea. "Drink this." Elsie wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "I wasn't trying to be stupid." "I know. But you have to understand this place is dangerous. Animals, weather, men who don't always have good intentions. We have rules for a reason. When something happens, you stay inside unless Caleb or I tell you otherwise. Understand?" "Yes." Rosa sat down across from her. "You can't keep trying to prove yourself, mija. Nobody here thinks you're worthless. You don't have to earn your place by running into danger." "I just wanted to help," Elsie said again, quieter this time. "I know, but there are better ways." Rosa sipped her own tea. "You want to help? Learn. Get stronger. Pay attention. That's what helps out here. Not bravery for the sake of being brave." Elsie nodded, feeling the weight of the last hour settle into her bones. She finished her tea and let Rosa walk her back to bed. As she lay in the dark, listening to the ranch settle down again, she thought about what Rosa had said. She'd spent so long being told she was a burden that the idea of just existing without having to prove her worth felt impossible. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that's what made this place different. The storm broke the next morning, and Caleb made good on his promise. He saddled his horse and rode to town, leaving Dutch in charge. He didn't take Elsie with him, and she didn't ask to go. He came back that evening, snow-crusted in his beard, his face grim. Rosa met him at the door. "Well?" "Talked to Garrett. He took down everything I told him, said he'd keep an eye out for anyone matching Vivian's description, but without witnesses or proof she actually abandoned the kid, there's not much he can do." "So that's it?" For now, Caleb pulled off his gloves. But he put it on record. If she shows up claiming Elsie was stolen or kidnapped, there's documentation that says otherwise. That enough to protect her? It'll have to be. Elsie listened from the kitchen, pretending to focus on the vegetables she was cutting. The conversation wasn't about her exactly, but it was. Her future being decided by people who barely knew her. But at least they were trying. That was more than most people had ever done. Caleb came into the kitchen and sat down heavily. You hear all that? Yes. You understand what it means? I think so. Good. He accepted the coffee Rosa handed him. Because things might get complicated from here, but we'll handle it. You just focus on getting through winter. Elsie nodded and went back to her work. Outside, the sun was setting over the Montana hills, painting the snow gold and orange. The world looked almost peaceful. But Elsie had learned a long time ago that peace was just the space between storms, and she could feel the next one coming. The storm she'd been waiting for arrived 6 weeks later, but it didn't come as snow. It came as a woman in a dark traveling coat stepping down from a hired wagon in front of the Blackthorn Ranch, her face set hard as iron beneath her bonnet. Vivian Crow had come back. Elsie saw her first. She'd been in the barn helping Marcus organize tack when she heard the wagon pull up, and something in the sound of it, the deliberate way it stopped, the silence that followed, made her move to the door and look out. The recognition hit her like a fist to the stomach. Vivian stood in the yard, brushing dust from her coat, looking around at the ranch with an expression Elsie couldn't quite read. Not quite approval. Not quite contempt. Something calculating. Beside Vivian stood a man Elsie had never seen before. He was tall, thin, dressed in a suit that had seen better days, with a narrow face and eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything, assessing value. He had a gun on his hip worn in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. Elsie stepped back into the shadows of the barn, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Marcus appeared beside her, massive and quiet. That someone you know? My stepmother, Elsie whispered. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to the handle of the pitchfork leaning against the wall. Boss knows she's coming. No. Stay here. He moved toward the barn door, but Elsie grabbed his arm. Wait, don't. I'm not doing anything, just watching. Marcus positioned himself where he could see but wouldn't be immediately visible. You stay back. Caleb came out of the main house, Dutch a step behind him. Even from this distance, Elsie could see the change in Caleb's posture. The way his shoulders set, his hand dropping casually to rest near the revolver at his hip. He'd recognized her too. Help you folks with something? Caleb's voice carried across the yard, polite but cold. Vivian smiled. It was the same smile Elsie remembered from the wagon, the one that never reached her eyes. Mr. Mercer, I presume? I'm Vivian Crow. I believe you have something that belongs to me. That right? My stepdaughter, Elsie Rowan. I understand she's been staying here since my husband passed. Vivian's voice was smooth, practiced. I've come to collect her and take her somewhere more appropriate. Caleb didn't move. Appropriate. Yes, a growing girl needs a woman's guidance. Surely you understand. A ranch full of men is no place for a child. Funny, Caleb said. You didn't seem to think she needed a woman's guidance when you threw her off your wagon in the middle of nowhere and left her to freeze to death. The smile flickered. I don't know what lies the child has been telling you. She didn't tell me anything I couldn't see for myself. Bruises, scars, half-starved and terrified. That ring a bell? The man beside Vivian stepped forward slightly. Now hold on. Who are you? Caleb cut him off. Frank Porter. I'm Mrs. Crow's husband. He said it with a kind of proprietary pride that made Elsie's skin crawl. We were married 3 weeks ago in Helena, which makes me the child's legal guardian now. That's not how guardianship works. Maybe not back east, Porter said, his voice taking on an edge. But out here, family takes care of family. And Elsie's family. She was family when you left her in the snow too? Caleb asked Vivian. Vivian's expression hardened. There was a misunderstanding. The journey was difficult. I was grieving my husband, and in my confused state, I thought she'd wandered off. By the time I realized my mistake and went back to look for her, she was gone. I've been searching for weeks. It was a good lie. Smooth, reasonable. The kind of lie that might actually work on someone who hadn't seen Elsie that first night. Caleb laughed. It was a short, harsh sound without any humor in it. You're good. I'll give you that. But you're not good enough. I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate you showing up on my land trying to spin stories. The girl stays here. Porter's hand moved closer to his gun. We don't want trouble, Mercer. We just want what's ours. She's not yours. Never was. The law might see it different. Then take it up with the law. Caleb's voice was flat. There's a marshal in town, Garrett. He knows the whole story. You want to make a legal claim, you go through him. Vivian and Porter exchanged a look. Something passed between them, some silent communication that made Elsie's stomach turn. We'll do that, Vivian said finally. But, Mr. Mercer, you should know. I'm prepared to fight for my stepdaughter, in court if necessary. And judges tend to side with family, especially when the alternative is, she gestured at the ranch, at Caleb. An unmarried man with no legal claim whatsoever. Get off my property. We're leaving, but we'll be back, with the proper authority. Vivian turned toward the wagon, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Mr. Mercer? You might want to ask yourself why a man like you is so interested in keeping a young girl. People might wonder about that, might start asking uncomfortable questions. The implication hung in the air like poison. Dutch took a step forward, his face dark with anger, but Caleb held up a hand, stopping him. You finished? Caleb asked quietly. For now. Vivian and Porter climbed back into the wagon. The driver snapped the reins and they rolled away, heading back toward town. Caleb stood watching until they disappeared, then turned and walked straight to the barn. He found Elsie standing in the shadows, shaking, Marcus beside her. You heard all that, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Elsie nodded. All right, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go inside with Rosa. You're going to stay there. You don't go anywhere alone. You don't talk to anyone from town unless I'm with you. And if anyone asks you questions, you tell them to talk to me. Understand? Are they going to take me? Elsie's voice came out small and broken. No. But she said the law. I don't care what she said. She's not getting you. Caleb crouched down so he was eye level with her. Listen to me. That woman abandoned you, left you to die. Any judge with half a brain will see that. But she's going to try to twist it, make herself look like the victim. So we have to be smart. How? Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. We make sure everyone knows the truth before she can spread her lies. The ranch hands, the town, anyone who will listen. And we get Marshal Garrett to do his job properly this time. What if it's not enough? Then we'll figure something else out. He stood up. But you don't worry about that. That's my job. Rosa appeared in the barn doorway. Boss, you want me to... Take her inside. Don't let her out of your sight. Rosa nodded and held out her hand to Elsie. Come on, mija. Elsie followed her to the house, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. The kitchen felt too bright, too warm, like nothing bad could possibly happen here. But she knew better. Rosa sat her down and started making tea even though Elsie hadn't asked for it. She's really married again, Elsie said quietly. Already. Some people move fast when there's money involved. What money? My father didn't have anything. Rosa paused in her work, considering her words. You're here, aren't you? Living on the biggest ranch in the territory, with a man who's known to be wealthy. To someone like Vivian, that makes you valuable, not as a person, as leverage. The words settled into Elsie's chest like stones. She wants Caleb's money. Probably. Or she figures she can make trouble for him if he doesn't pay her to go away. Either way, she's not here because she cares about you. I know. Elsie wrapped her arms around herself. I knew that the day she left me in the snow. Rosa set the tea down and sat across from her. What did your father see in her? I don't know. After my mother died, he was lost. Vivian showed up in town, paid attention to him, and he married her 6 months later. I tried to tell him something was wrong with her, but he said I was just jealous. Elsie stared into her tea. Maybe I was, but I was also right. Children usually are. Adults just don't like listening. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, Elsie could hear Caleb and Dutch talking, their voices low and serious. Finally, Rosa said, You scared? Yes? Good. Fear keeps you sharp, just don't let it paralyze you. What am I supposed to do? Exactly what Caleb said, stay close, tell the truth, and trust that we're not going to let anything happen to you. Elsie wanted to believe that, but trust had been beaten out of her slowly over the years, and it didn't come back just because someone asked for it. That night, Caleb called a meeting in the dining hall. All the ranch hands were there, sitting on the benches, looking at their boss with various degrees of concern and curiosity. Elsie sat in the kitchen with Rosa, the door cracked open so they could hear. Some of you saw the visitors we had today, Caleb began. For those who didn't, that was Vivian Crow, the woman who abandoned Elsie on the trail back in December. She's claiming she wants the girl back, says it was all a misunderstanding. Murmurs ran through the room. Dutch spoke up. You believe her? Not for a second, but she's married now to a man named Frank Porter, and they're going to try to use the law to force the issue. On what grounds? That was Tommy leaning forward. She left the kid to die. On the grounds that she's family and I'm not. That's how it works. Blood relation trumps everything else, even when that blood relation is worthless. More murmuring. Someone in the back, Elsie thought it was Marcus, said something in a voice too low to make out. Caleb nodded. Which brings me to why I called you all here. What happens next is going to affect everyone on this ranch. There's going to be talk in town, maybe worse than talk. People are going to ask questions, make assumptions. Some of you might get pulled into it if there's a court hearing. What do you need from us, boss? Dutch asked. The truth. If anyone asks what condition Elsie was in when I brought her here, you tell them. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't exaggerate. Just tell them what you saw. We can do that, Tommy said, and several others nodded. There's something else. Caleb paused, and Elsie could hear the weight in his silence. Vivian made an implication today about why I took Elsie in. She's going to spread that around town, try to make it look improper, try to make people question my motives. The room went very quiet. Anyone who knows me knows that's horseshit, Caleb continued. But people who don't know me, people who want to see me fail, they might decide to believe it anyway, so I'm telling you now. If you want to leave, find work somewhere else where there's less complication. I won't hold it against you. This is going to get ugly, and I can't promise it won't touch everyone here. Dutch stood up. Boss, I've been working for you for 8 years. I've seen you face down rustlers, weather, and every kind of trouble this territory can throw at a man. You think I'm going to run because some woman is spreading lies? I'm saying you have a choice. Yeah, and I'm making it. I'm staying. Around the room, other heads nodded. Tommy said, We're not going anywhere, Mr. Mercer. Caleb looked at his men for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not softness, exactly, but something close to gratitude. All right then, we stick together. We tell the truth, and we make damn sure that girl stays where she belongs. The meeting broke up, and the hands filed out, talking among themselves in low voices. Caleb came into the kitchen and found Elsie and Rosa still sitting at the table. You heard? He said. Yes, Rosa replied. Caleb poured himself coffee and sat down heavily. Garrett's going to hear Vivian's side tomorrow. He'll probably want to talk to Elsie too. She'll tell him what happened, Rosa said. I know, but we need to be prepared for him to side with Vivian anyway. The law doesn't always follow sense out here. So what's the plan? Caleb was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that. There might be a way to make this harder for them to fight. What way? He looked at Rosa, and something passed between them. Some understanding that Elsie couldn't quite grasp. We could get married, Caleb said quietly. Rosa went very still. Excuse me? It's practical. If I have a wife, suddenly it's not improper for Elsie to be here. She's being raised by a married couple, 2 parents instead of 1 bachelor. Makes the whole thing more defensible. Rosa stared at him. You're asking me to marry you so you can keep a child. I'm asking you to consider it as a business arrangement. Nothing would have to change between us. But on paper, legally, it would give us better standing. Caleb, I know what I'm asking, and I know it's not fair. But I don't know what else to do. If they take her back to Vivian, she won't survive. You saw her when I brought her in. You saw what that woman did. Rosa looked at Elsie, then back at Caleb. This is insane. Probably. People will talk. They're already talking. It won't be real. It'll be real enough where it counts, in front of the law. Rosa sat back in her chair, thinking. Elsie barely dared to breathe, afraid that any sound would shatter whatever was happening. Finally, Rosa said, "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure I'm not letting them take her. If this is what it takes, then yes, I'm sure." Rosa looked at Elsie again. "What do you think, mija? You want to be stuck with the two of us as your parents?" Elsie's throat was too tight to speak. She managed a nod. "All right then." Rosa turned back to Caleb. "We do this. We do it right. Not some quick ceremony in front of a drunk preacher. We do it proper in town, with witnesses." "Agreed." "And Elsie stays with me. Not in that room off the kitchen. She gets a proper bedroom upstairs." "Whatever you want." Rosa stood up and held out her hand. Caleb stood too and took it. They shook once, firm and serious, like they were sealing a business deal, which Elsie supposed they were. "When?" Rosa asked. "Soon as we can arrange it, before Vivian gets too far with whatever legal claim she's building. I'll need a dress. Buy whatever you need. I'll cover it." Rosa nodded and released his hand. She looked at Elsie, and her expression softened slightly. "You understand what this means? Caleb and I aren't in love. This isn't a fairy tale. We're doing this to protect you, to give you a real family in the eyes of the law." "I understand," Elsie whispered. "Good. Because once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be bound together, the three of us. For better or worse." "I understand," Elsie said again, and this time she meant it. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Rosa went to town and bought a simple but respectable dress. Caleb met with Marshal Garrett and made it clear what he intended to do. Word spread through the territory faster than wildfire. The reactions were mixed. Some people thought it was romantic, the hard rancher finding love again after years of mourning. Others thought it was suspicious, a convenient marriage right when legal troubles were brewing. And some didn't care one way or another as long as it didn't affect their own lives. Vivian and Porter heard about it, of course. They showed up at the ranch 2 days before the wedding, faces tight with barely controlled anger. "This is a sham," Vivian said, standing in the yard with her arms crossed. "Everyone knows it. You're marrying your cook to keep Elsie." "I'm marrying Rosa because I want to," Caleb said evenly, "and because she's a good woman who deserves better than working herself to death in my kitchen. What I do on my own property is my business. The marshal will see right through this. Then let him. Rosa and I will be married either way." Porter stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun in a way that wasn't quite a threat, but wasn't quite not one either. "You're making a mistake, Mercer, fighting us on this. We could make things very difficult for you." "You could try. There's money to be made in Helena, business opportunities. We don't need the girl for that. We're willing to negotiate." So there it was, the real reason they'd come back. "How much?" Caleb asked flatly. Vivian's eyes lit up. "Well, considering the expense of raising a child, the emotional distress of thinking she was lost." "How much?" $500, Porter said, "and we'll sign papers saying we have no further claim." "Get off my property." "That's not—" "I said get off my property before I have you thrown off." Porter's hand tightened on his gun, but Dutch and 2 other hands had appeared from the barn, all of them armed. The math wasn't in Porter's favor. "You'll regret this," Vivian said coldly. "I doubt it." They left, but the threat hung in the air long after they were gone. "They're not giving up," Dutch said quietly. "No," Caleb agreed, "but neither are we." The wedding took place on a cold Saturday morning in the town's only church. It wasn't a grand affair. Just Rosa in her new dress, Caleb in his best suit, and a handful of witnesses including Dutch, Tommy, and Marshal Garrett himself. Elsie stood in the front row, wearing a dress Rosa had made for her, watching 2 people she barely knew bind themselves together for her sake. The minister went through the ceremony quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the whole arrangement. Everyone in town knew why this marriage was happening, but legal was legal, and as long as Caleb and Rosa said the words, it counted. "Do you, Caleb Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Rosa Delgado, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss, just a handshake and a nod, like they'd just signed a business contract, which, in every way that mattered to them, they had. They signed the papers. Marshal Garrett signed as a witness. And just like that, Elsie Rowan had something she'd never had before. A legal family. The celebration afterward was subdued. The ranch hands raised a few glasses in the bunkhouse, but it was clear everyone understood this wasn't a normal wedding. It was a strategic move in a larger war. That night, Rosa moved some of her things into the East Wing with Caleb. They maintained separate rooms. The arrangement was legal, not romantic, but they were under the same roof now, presenting a united front. Elsie got the bedroom Rosa had vacated, a larger room on the second floor with a window that looked out over the ranch. It was the nicest room she'd ever had, the nicest anything she'd ever had. She stood at the window that night, watching the lights in the bunkhouse, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down. Tomorrow, Vivian and Porter would probably make their next move. There would be more fighting, more legal maneuvering, more attempts to take her away. But tonight, for the first time since her father died, Elsie felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because anyone had to keep her, but because two people had chosen to fight for her when they didn't have to. The door opened behind her and Rosa came in, still wearing her wedding dress. "You should be sleeping," Rosa said gently. "I know, Elsie didn't know how to finish. Rosa came to stand beside her at the window. "It's a lot to take in." "Why did you say yes? Really?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Because Caleb was right. You wouldn't survive going back to that woman. And because," she paused, "because I know what it's like to be unwanted, to feel like you're just taking up space in the world. I'm not going to let you grow up feeling that way if I can help it. Even though you barely know me, we'll get to know each other. That's what families do." Rosa put her hand on Elsie's shoulder. "This wasn't how I thought my life would go, but life doesn't ask permission before it changes. You just have to decide if you're going to fight or give up. I'm choosing to fight." Elsie leaned into Rosa's side, and Rosa's arm came around her shoulders, holding her steady. "Thank you," Elsie whispered. "Thank me when we win," Rosa said. "For now, just get some sleep. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to make this work." She left, and Elsie climbed into bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Outside, a wolf howled somewhere in the distant hills. But for the first time since that night on the frozen trail, the sound didn't terrify her. She was inside now, protected, part of something bigger than herself, and she'd fight like hell to keep it that way. The fight Rosa had promised came faster than any of them expected. 3 days after the wedding, Marshal Garrett rode out to the ranch with 2 deputies and a summons from the territorial court. Vivian and Frank Porter had filed a formal custody petition, and Judge Morrison wanted to hear the case in 1 week. Caleb read the summons standing in the yard, his face getting harder with each line. When he finished, he handed it to Rosa without a word. "A week," she said quietly. "That's not much time to prepare." "It's enough." Caleb turned to Garrett. "You read this before you brought it out here?" The marshal shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. "I did." "And?" "And the judge wants to hear both sides. That's how it works, Mercer. You know that. What I know is that woman left a child to die and now she's using the law to finish the job. That's for the judge to decide. Morrison's a drunk who can be bought for the price of a decent bottle of whiskey. Everyone knows it." Garrett's expression hardened. "Careful. That's still a court official you're talking about." "It's the truth." "Maybe so. But you go into that courtroom with that attitude and you'll lose before you even speak." Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. "Look, I put everything you told me in my report. The condition the girl was in when you found her, the timeline, all of it. But Porter's got himself a lawyer from Helena, and they're building a case that you took advantage of a grieving widow, that you manipulated the situation to steal her stepdaughter." "That's insane." "That's what they're arguing. And unless you can prove otherwise, the judge might believe it." Rosa spoke up. "What about Elsie? Does she get to speak?" "The judge will decide that when he hears the case. But usually," Garrett hesitated, "usually in custody matters, they don't put much weight on what a child says. Too easy to influence them." "So we're supposed to just stand there while they lie and hope the judge sees through it?" Caleb's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "No. You're supposed to get yourself a lawyer and build the best case you can. That's how you fight this." Garrett gathered his reins. "Hearings set for next Thursday, 2 o'clock at the courthouse. Don't be late." He rode off with his deputies, leaving Caleb and Rosa standing in the cold. We need a lawyer, Rosa said. I know. Do you know any good ones? Caleb was quiet for a moment. There's a man in Helena, Samuel Cross. He handled some land disputes for me a few years back. He's not cheap, but he's good. Then send for him. He might not come. It's a custody case, not property. Lawyers don't like getting involved in family matters. Make him come. Rosa's voice was steel. Whatever it costs. We're not walking into that courtroom alone. Caleb nodded and went to write the telegram. Inside the house, Elsie had heard the whole conversation from her window. She came downstairs slowly, her stomach churning with fear and something else she couldn't quite name. Rosa was in the kitchen, yanking pots and pans around with more force than necessary. Rosa? The older woman stopped and turned. You heard? Yes. Rosa's expression softened slightly. Come here. Elsie crossed to her and Rosa pulled her into a quick, tight hug. Listen to me. We knew this was coming. We're prepared for it. But what if the judge... No. We don't think like that. We focus on what we can control. Rosa released her and went back to the stove. You remember everything that happened. Every detail. From the day your father died to the day Vivian left you on that trail. You don't change anything. You don't exaggerate. You just tell the truth exactly as it was. What if they don't believe me? Then we make them believe you. Rosa slammed a pot onto the stove. I'm not letting that woman win. Not after everything we've done. Caleb came back in, already pulling on his coat. I'm riding to town to send the telegram. Then I'm going to talk to some people. What people? Rosa asked. Anyone who was on that wagon train. Someone had to see how Vivian treated Elsie before she abandoned her. If we can find witnesses, it strengthens our case. That was months ago. People scatter. Then I'll find where they scattered too. He looked at Elsie. You remember anyone specific? Any families who traveled with you? Elsie thought hard. There was a family with 3 boys, the Hendersons, and an older couple, the Pratts. They had a yellow wagon with a broken wheel that my father helped fix. Good. That's a start. Caleb headed for the door, then paused. Rosa, keep her close. Don't let her go anywhere without you. I know. He left, and the house felt emptier with him gone. Rosa turned back to Elsie. You hungry? Not really. Eat anyway. We've got a long week ahead, and you need your strength. The days that followed were tense and strange. Caleb spent most of his time in town, tracking down members of the wagon train, talking to anyone who might be willing to testify. Rosa kept Elsie busy with chores, teaching her more complicated recipes, anything to keep her mind occupied. But at night, lying in bed, Elsie couldn't stop thinking about the courtroom, about standing in front of a judge and having to explain why she deserved to stay somewhere she actually wanted to be. On the 3rd day, Samuel Cross arrived. He was a lean man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He set up in Caleb's study and spent 2 hours interviewing Elsie, asking her the same questions over and over in slightly different ways. When did your father die? January 7th, 6 days before Vivian left me. And how did he die? He got sick, started coughing blood. It got worse and worse until he couldn't breathe right anymore. Did Vivian try to help him? Elsie hesitated. Not really. She gave him water sometimes, but mostly she just waited. Cross made notes. Tell me about the day she left you on the trail. Elsie went through it again, the wagon stopping, Vivian's flat voice, the canteen and stale bread, watching the wagon disappear. Did she say anything about coming back for you? She said someone might come along eventually, maybe. Did you believe her? No, I think she hoped I'd die before anyone found me. Cross studied her. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. The truth and what you can prove in court are sometimes different things. He set down his pen. The problem we're facing is that everything you've told me is your word against Vivian's. She'll claim it was a misunderstanding, that she was grief-stricken and confused, that she came back as soon as she realized you were missing. But that's a lie. I know. But lies told well in court can be very convincing. He leaned back in his chair. That's why we need those witnesses. People who saw how she treated you before your father died. People who can testify that her behavior toward you wasn't maternal or protective. Will that be enough? It might be. combined with your testimony and the physical evidence of your condition when Mr. Mercer found you. Cross picked up his pen again. Now I need you to tell me about the bruises. Elsie's throat tightened. What about them? Where they came from? How you got them? Be specific. She didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to remember Vivian's hands, the sharp strikes when Elsie moved too slow or spoke out of turn. But Cross was waiting, and this was important, so she told him. By the time she finished, Cross's expression had gone very cold. Good, he said quietly. That's what we need. Facts, details, things that can't be explained away. He stood up. You did well, Elsie. I know that wasn't easy. Is it enough to win? I don't know, but it's enough to fight with. The night before the hearing, the ranch was quiet in a way that felt wrong. The hands were in the bunkhouse. The horses settled in the barn. Inside the main house, Caleb sat at the kitchen table going over papers with Cross, while Rosa cooked dinner with mechanical precision. Elsie sat in the corner, pretending to read, but really just listening. The Hendersons will testify, Caleb was saying. They remember Vivian, said she treated Elsie more like a servant than a child. Made her do all the cooking and cleaning while Vivian sat in the wagon. That helps, Cross said. What about the Pratts? Dead, both of them. Fever got them a month ago in Helena. Cross swore quietly. Anyone else? A few others who remember seeing them on the trail, but nobody who interacted with Vivian directly. It's thin. It's what we have. Cross shuffled his papers. The marriage helps. Shows stability. A two-parent household. But Porter's lawyer is going to argue it was done purely to circumvent the law. It was, Caleb said bluntly. But that doesn't make it wrong. No, but it makes it look calculated, and judges don't like feeling like they're being manipulated. Rosa turned from the stove. So what do? We tell the truth. We present Elsie as she is, a child who was abandoned and nearly died. We show the evidence of abuse. We demonstrate that she's better off here than she ever would be with Vivian, and we hope the judge is honest enough to see it. And if he's not? Caleb asked. Cross met his eyes. Then we appeal. We fight it as long as we can, but Mercer, you need to be prepared for the possibility that we might lose. No. I'm serious. Morrison is unpredictable. If he decides in Vivian's favor, then I don't give her back. The room went very quiet. Cross set down his papers carefully. That would be kidnapping. You'd be breaking the law. I don't care. You'd lose everything. The ranch, your reputation, probably your freedom. They'd send federal marshals after you. I said I don't care. Caleb's voice was hard as iron. That girl is not going back to the woman who tried to kill her. I don't care what some drunk judge says about it. Rosa spoke quietly. Caleb, I mean it, Rosa. If we lose tomorrow, we take Elsie and we disappear. Canada, maybe, or Mexico. Somewhere they can't touch us. You'd give up everything you built? In a heartbeat. Cross stood up. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that, because if you're serious, you're talking about throwing away any chance of a legal solution. He gathered his papers. Get some sleep. All of you. Tomorrow we go in there and we fight this the right way. Through the law. Not around it. He left, heading to the room Rosa had prepared for him. Caleb sat staring at the table, his jaw tight. You really mean it, Rosa said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You'd walk away from all of this. For her? Yes. Caleb looked up, and there was something raw in his eyes. I already lost one child. I'm not losing another. Rosa came and sat beside him. We're not going to lose. You don't know that. No, but I believe it anyway. She put her hand over his. We've done everything we can. Now we trust that it's enough. Elsie stood up from her corner. Both adults looked at her, seemingly surprised she was still there. I'm sorry, Elsie said quietly. For what? Caleb asked. For causing all this trouble. For making you risk everything. I didn't ask for any of it. Caleb stood and crossed to her, then crouched down so they were eye level. You listen to me. None of this is your fault. Not one bit of it. You didn't ask to be abandoned. You didn't ask to be found. You're just a kid who deserves better than the hand she was dealt. And if fighting for that causes trouble, then that's on the people who made it necessary, not on you. Understand? Elsie nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Good. Now go get some rest. Tomorrow we show that judge exactly what kind of people we are. Elsie went upstairs, but she didn't sleep. She lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the ranch at night. Somewhere below, she heard Rosa and Caleb talking in low voices. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. They were scared too. That made her feel a little better in a strange way. At least she wasn't the only one. Morning came gray and cold. They ate breakfast in silence, then dressed in their best clothes. Rosa wore the dress from the wedding. Caleb wore his suit. Elsie wore the nicest dress Rosa had made for her, dark blue wool with careful stitching. The ride to town felt endless. They took the wagon, all four of them. Caleb, Rosa, Elsie, and Cross. Dutch and Tommy rode alongside on horseback, there for support even though they couldn't come into the courtroom. When they reached town, people stopped and stared. Word had spread, of course. Everyone knew about the hearing. Everyone had an opinion. The courthouse was a squat stone building in the center of town. Inside, it smelled like old wood and tobacco. The courtroom itself was small, with wooden benches for spectators and a raised platform for the judge. Vivian and Porter were already there, sitting with their lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never done a day of hard work in his life. Vivian wore black, playing the grieving widow. Porter sat beside her looking smug. Caleb's hand tightened on Elsie's shoulder. Straight backs. Heads up. We don't give them the satisfaction of looking scared. They took their seats on the opposite side. Cross laid out his papers with precise movements. At exactly 2 o'clock, Judge Morrison entered. He was a heavy man in his 60s with a red face and watery eyes. He settled behind the bench with a grunt and surveyed the room like he'd rather be anywhere else. "All right," he said. "Let's get this done. This is a custody hearing for one Elsie Rowan, minor child. Petitioners are Vivian and Frank Porter. Respondents are Caleb and Rosa Mercer. Everyone understand why we're here?" "Yes, Your Honor," Cross said. The other lawyer, whose name was Whitmore, nodded. "Good. Mr. Whitmore, you're petitioning for custody. Make your case." Whitmore stood, all polish and practiced gestures. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of a family being reunited. Mrs. Porter, formerly Mrs. Rowan, suffered a terrible tragedy when her husband passed during their journey west. In her grief and confusion, she became separated from her stepdaughter. When she realized what had happened, she immediately began searching, only to discover that Mr. Mercer had taken the child in without any legal authority to do so. The child was half frozen and abandoned," Cross interrupted. Morrison held up a hand. "You'll get your turn, Mr. Cross. Continue, Mr. Whitmore." "Thank you, Your Honor. The Porters are now settled in Helena with stable employment and a proper home. They're prepared to provide Elsie with the care and guidance she needs. Meanwhile, Mr. Mercer is a single man. He's married," Cross said. Whitmore smiled thinly. "Yes. Married 3 days after the Porters filed their initial claim. A marriage that appears to any objective observer to be a legal maneuver designed to circumvent proper custody procedures." Morrison looked at Caleb and Rosa. "That true? You married to keep the girl?" Caleb stood. "We married because it was the right thing to do, for Elsie and for us." "That's not an answer." "Yes," Rosa said, standing beside Caleb. "We married to protect her, because the alternative was sending her back to a woman who tried to kill her." "That's a serious accusation," Morrison said. "It's the truth." Morrison waved them both down. "Sit. This isn't testimony time yet." He looked at Whitmore. "You have evidence to support your claim?" "We have Mrs. Porter's sworn statement. We have documentation of their marriage, which makes Mr. Porter the legal guardian. And we have witnesses who will testify that Mr. Mercer has been known to act impulsively and without regard for proper channels." "Mr. Cross?" Cross stood smoothly. "Your Honor, we have medical testimony about the condition of the child when she was found. We have witnesses from the wagon train who will describe Mrs. Porter's treatment of Elsie before the abandonment. And we have the child herself, who can tell this court exactly what happened." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "The child's 10 years old enough to know when she's being left to die. Old enough to be coached on what to say, too. She hasn't been coached, Your Honor. She's been asked to tell the truth. There's a difference." Morrison grunted. "We'll see. Call your first witness, Mr. Whitmore." Vivian took the stand. She was good. Elsie had to admit that. She cried at all the right moments, spoke in a soft, wounded voice about her grief and confusion, about how desperately she'd searched for her missing stepdaughter. "I love that child like my own," Vivian said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "When I realized she was gone, I thought my heart would break. I've been sick with worry." "Mrs. Porter," Whitmore said gently, "can you describe your relationship with Elsie before your husband's death?" "We were close. She was my little helper, always eager to please." Vivian smiled sadly. "She took her father's death very hard. I think that's why she wandered off. She wasn't thinking clearly." "And when you realized she was missing?" "I turned the wagon around immediately, searched for hours. But the trail was so long, and there were so many places she could have gone. Eventually, I had to continue on to Helena to get help. I reported her missing as soon as I arrived." "Did you?" "Of course, you can check the records." Cross stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to see those records." Whitmore looked uncomfortable. "They're being sent from Helena. Should arrive any day." "How convenient," Cross said dryly. Morrison banged his gavel. "That's enough. Mr. Cross, you'll get your chance to cross-examine." And he did. Cross approached Vivian like a wolf circling wounded prey. "Mrs. Porter, you say you and Elsie were close. Can you tell me her favorite color?" Vivian blinked. I don't recall offhand. What about her birthday? When is it?" "It's been a difficult time. I can't remember every—" "October 15th, Cross said. "She turned 10 3 months before you abandoned her. Surely a loving stepmother would remember her stepdaughter's birthday." "Objection," Whitmore said. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Morrison said, but he was looking at Vivian with slightly narrowed eyes. Cross continued. "You say Elsie was your little helper. What chores did she do?" "Oh, the usual, cooking, cleaning." "All the cooking?" "Well, I helped, of course." "Did you?" Cross picked up a paper. "I have testimony from a Mr. Henderson who traveled with your wagon train. He states that he never once saw you cook a meal, that Elsie did all the work while you sat in the wagon." Vivian's face flushed. "He's mistaken." "Is he? Or were you using a 10-year-old child as unpaid labor?" "Your Honor," Whitmore started. "I'll allow it," Morrison said. "Answer the question, Mrs. Porter." "Elsie enjoyed cooking. I was giving her responsibility." "How generous." Cross's voice dripped sarcasm. "Tell me, when you realized Elsie was missing, you say you searched for hours. Which direction did you search?" All directions." "All directions? On foot? On the wagon?" "Both." "So you unhitched your wagon, searched on foot, then hitched it back up and searched by wagon? That must have taken considerable time." "I did what I could." "And yet no one from the wagon train you were traveling with reported seeing you search. In fact, Mr. Henderson states that you pulled away from the group 2 days before Elsie disappeared and he never saw you again until Helena." Vivian's hands twisted in her lap. "He's lying." "Is he? Or are you?" "Objection." Whitmore was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is harassment." "It's cross-examination," Cross said calmly. "And I'm just getting started." He went on, methodically dismantling every lie Vivian had told. By the time he finished, she was pale and shaking, her earlier composure completely gone. "No further questions," Cross said, returning to his seat. Morrison looked at Vivian. "You can step down." Porter took the stand next, but his testimony was brief and clearly rehearsed. He claimed to care about Elsie's welfare, to want to provide her with a stable home, but Cross tore through that just as efficiently. "Mr. Porter, when did you meet Mrs. Porter?" "About 6 weeks ago." "And you married 3 weeks ago?" "Yes." "Quick courtship." "We knew what we wanted." "Indeed. Tell me, what do you do for work?" "I'm in business." "What kind of business?" Porter hesitated. "Various ventures? Gambling?" "I've been known to play cards." "For money?" "Sometimes." Cross pulled out another paper. "Your Honor, I have records from 3 saloons in Helena showing that Mr. Porter has been banned for cheating at cards. I also have testimony that he currently owes over $200 in gambling debts." Porter's face went red. "Those records are public information, available to anyone who asks." Cross looked at the judge. This is the stable home environment they're offering, a con man and a woman who abandoned a child in the wilderness. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Call your next witness, Mr. Cross." Dutch took the stand and described the condition Elsie was in when Caleb brought her to the ranch. Tommy followed, corroborating. Then a Dr. Cross had brought in who'd examined Elsie more recently and could testify to the old bruises and scars. Finally, Cross said, "Your Honor, we'd like to call Elsie Rowan." Morrison looked at her. "The child wants to testify?" "Yes, Your Honor." "All right, but keep it brief." Elsie walked to the stand on shaking legs. The courtroom felt enormous, full of eyes watching her every move. The bailiff held out a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Elsie said quietly. Cross approached her gently. "Elsie, I know this is scary, but I just need you to tell the judge what happened. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Start with the day your father died." So she did. She told them everything. The fever, Vivian's cold indifference, the days after when Vivian started treating her worse, hitting her when she moved too slow, calling her worthless, the day Vivian stopped the wagon and told her to get out. "She said I ate too much," Elsie said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "That I couldn't keep up, that she didn't owe me anything now that my father was dead." "What did you do?" "I begged her not to leave me. She left anyway." "Did she say she was coming back?" "No, she said maybe someone would find me eventually, but she didn't sound like she believed it." Cross let that hang in the air. "What happened after she left?" "I walked. I tried to stay on the trail. I thought if I could just keep moving, someone might see me." Elsie wiped her eyes. "Then it got dark and the wolves came. I couldn't walk anymore. I thought I was going to die." "But you didn't." "No, Mr. Mercer found me. He shot at the wolves and took me back to the ranch." "And what was that like?" "Scary at first. I didn't know if he was going to keep me or send me away, but he and Rosa took care of me, fed me, gave me warm clothes and a bed, and—" Her voice broke. "They made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth saving." "Do you want to go back to Mrs. Porter?" "No." The word came out fierce and absolute. "I'd rather die than go back to her." Morrison leaned forward. "That's a strong statement, young lady." Elsie looked directly at him. "She left me to freeze to death. If she gets me back, she'll just find another way to get rid of me. She doesn't want me. She wants Mr. Mercer's money." "Objection!" Whitmore was on his feet. "The child is speculating." "I'm telling the truth," Elsie said loudly. "She's lying. Everything she said up there was a lie. And if you can't see that, then you're either stupid or you don't care." The courtroom erupted. Morrison banged his gavel. "Order, young lady. You will not speak to this court that way." "Why not?" "You're going to give me back to her anyway, aren't you? Because the law says family is family, even when family tries to kill you." "Well, I don't care what the law says. Caleb and Rosa are my family now. They're the ones who saved me. They're the ones who fought for me. And if you take me away from them, you're just as bad as Vivian." "That's enough." Morrison's face was red. "Mr. Cross, control your witness." But Cross was smiling slightly. "I think she's doing fine, Your Honor." Morrison glared at them both, then waved Elsie off the stand. "Step down. We're taking a recess." The courtroom emptied into the hallway. Caleb pulled Elsie aside, his hands on her shoulders. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Did I ruin everything?" "No, you told the truth. That's all we asked." Rosa joined them, her face tight with worry. The judge looked angry. "Morrison's always angry," Cross said, appearing beside them. "But Elsie's testimony was powerful, raw, real. That's hard to fake." "So we might win?" "We might, or we might have just made him mad enough to rule against us out of spite." Cross shook his head. "Either way, we'll know soon." They filed back into the courtroom 20 minutes later. Morrison looked even more irritated than before. He shuffled papers on his bench, muttering to himself, then looked up at the assembled crowd. "I've heard enough," he said. "This is an unusual case with extenuating circumstances on both sides. The law clearly favors blood relations, especially when one party has only recently married and the other has legal standing as step-parent and spouse." Elsie's heart sank. "However," Morrison continued, "the law also requires me to consider the welfare of the child. And based on the testimony I've heard today, I have serious concerns about Mrs. Porter's fitness as a guardian. Hope flickered. That said, I also have concerns about the appropriateness of a child being raised on a working ranch with minimal female supervision. Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer provides, Cross started. I'm not finished. Morrison glared at him. What I'm saying is that this situation is far from ideal on both sides. Therefore, I'm making the following ruling. The room held its breath. Custody of Elsie Rowan will remain with Caleb and Rosa Mercer for a provisional period of 6 months. During that time, a court-appointed representative will visit the ranch periodically to assess the living conditions and the child's welfare. At the end of 6 months, we'll reconvene and I'll make a final determination. Vivian shot to her feet. Your Honor, that's final, Morrison said. My ruling stands. Mrs. Porter, if you have concerns, you can file an appeal. But until then, the child stays where she is. He banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Rosa pulled Elsie into her arms, holding her tight. Caleb's hand came down on both their shoulders, his grip fierce. We won, Rosa whispered. We actually won. For now, Cross cautioned. 6 months. We have to prove ourselves. We will, Caleb said. His voice was rough but certain. Whatever it takes. Across the courtroom, Vivian and Porter were arguing with their lawyer in harsh whispers. Vivian's face was twisted with rage, all pretense of grief gone. She looked up and met Elsie's eyes. The hate there was so pure, so absolute that Elsie actually flinched, but then Caleb stepped between them, blocking Vivian from view. Don't look at her, he said quietly. She's got no power over you anymore. They left the courthouse together, walking out into the cold afternoon air. The ranch hands were waiting outside, and when they saw the expressions on everyone's faces, they let out a cheer. We're not done yet, Caleb warned them. 6 months, then we do this all over again. We'll be ready, Dutch said. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and red. Elsie sat between Caleb and Rosa in the wagon, feeling something she'd never felt before. Safe, not permanently, not guaranteed, but safe enough for now. And sometimes, now was all you could ask for. The court-appointed representative arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the hearing. Her name was Margaret Ashford, a thin woman in her 40s with steel-gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She carried a leather notebook and wore an expression that suggested she'd already decided what she was going to find. Elsie watched from the kitchen window as Mrs. Ashford climbed down from her hired wagon, smoothing her skirts and surveying the ranch with visible disapproval. She looks mean, Elsie said quietly. Rosa stood beside her, arms crossed. She looks like she's never done a day's real work in her life. That type always judges the hardest. Caleb came in from the barn, brushing dust from his shirt. She here? Just arrived. Rosa turned from the window. You going to be nice? I'm going to be civil. That's the best I can do. He went to meet Mrs. Ashford in the yard. Elsie and Rosa watched through the window as the woman spoke, gesturing at the buildings, her face pinched with what looked like criticism. When they came inside, Mrs. Ashford's eyes swept the kitchen with the same critical assessment. This is where the child takes her meals? Everyone takes their meals here, Rosa said, or in the dining hall with the hands. I see, Mrs. Ashford made a note. And where does she sleep? I'll show you. Rosa led her upstairs to Elsie's room. Mrs. Ashford examined everything. The bed, the washstand, the small collection of books Rosa had given Elsie. She opened the wardrobe and counted the dresses, ran her finger along the windowsill, checking for dust. The room is adequate, she said finally, though I question whether a child should be living in such close proximity to unmarried men. The hands live in the bunkhouse, Caleb said from the doorway. Elsie's never alone with any of them. Nevertheless, it's highly irregular. More notes. I'll need to interview the child. Alone. Rosa started to object, but Caleb put a hand on her arm. Fine. Use the parlor. Mrs. Ashford took Elsie downstairs and closed the parlor door firmly behind them. She sat in the best chair and gestured for Elsie to sit on the settee across from her. Now then, Mrs. Ashford said, opening her notebook, I need you to answer some questions honestly. You're not in trouble, but I must assess whether this environment is suitable for a young girl. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. First question. Have any of the men on this ranch ever made you feel uncomfortable or unsafe? No. Are you certain? You can tell me the truth. Nothing will happen to you. I am telling the truth. They've all been kind. Mrs. Ashford's pen hovered over the page. Kind how? Tommy taught me to rope. Marcus fixed my boots when they wore through. Dutch brings me interesting rocks he finds on the range. Elsie met the woman's eyes. They treat me like I belong here. And Mr. Mercer? How does he treat you? Like a father. But he's not your father. No, but he's the closest thing I've had to one since mine died. Mrs. Ashford made more notes. And Mrs. Mercer? How is your relationship with her? She's teaching me everything. Cooking, sewing, reading. She's patient even when I mess up. Do they punish you when you misbehave? Elsie thought about that. I haven't really misbehaved, but Rosa makes me redo things if I don't do them right the first time. And Caleb told me I couldn't go riding alone until I proved I could handle a horse properly. No physical punishment? No, ma'am. Have you seen Mr. and Mrs. Mercer demonstrate affection toward each other? The question caught Elsie off guard. What do you mean? Do they act like a married couple, or is this arrangement purely for legal convenience? Elsie knew what the woman was really asking, whether the marriage was real or just a trick to keep her. They respect each other, Elsie said carefully. They work together. They make decisions together. Isn't that what married people do? Mrs. Ashford's expression didn't change. In a typical marriage, yes, but this marriage occurred under unusual circumstances. My real parents didn't hug and kiss all the time either, Elsie said, but they were still married, still loved each other in their own way. Maybe Caleb and Rosa are like that. Are you trying to protect them? I'm trying to tell you the truth. You asked if this is a good place for me. It is. Better than anywhere I've ever been. If you can't see that, it's because you don't want to. Mrs. Ashford's pen stopped moving. She looked at Elsie for a long moment. You're very articulate for a 10-year-old. Rosa says reading helps with that. I'm sure it does. Mrs. Ashford closed her notebook. That's all for now. I'll speak with Mr. and Mrs. Mercer before I leave. She did, though Elsie wasn't privy to that conversation. When Mrs. Ashford finally left an hour later, her expression was no warmer than when she'd arrived. Well? Rosa asked Caleb after the wagon disappeared. She didn't say much, just that she'd file her report with the court. Do you think we passed? I don't know. She's not easy to read. Caleb looked at Elsie. What did you tell her? The truth. That this is a good place, that you and Rosa treat me well. Good girl. But the uncertainty hung over them for the next week, until a letter arrived from the court. Mrs. Ashford's report was mostly positive. The ranch was clean, the child was well cared for, and there were no obvious signs of abuse or neglect. However, she'd noted concerns about the unconventional nature of the household and recommended continued monitoring. It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it wasn't a condemnation either. We'll take it, Cross said when Caleb sent him a copy. It keeps the door open. The weeks turned into months. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow melting in patches, revealing brown grass and mud underneath. The ranch came alive again. Calving season, branding, the endless work of maintaining a cattle operation this size. Elsie threw herself into learning everything she could. Rosa taught her to cook meals for 15 men without breaking a sweat. Caleb taught her to ride properly, to read the weather, to understand the rhythms of ranch life. Dutch showed her how to shoot, starting with a small rifle and working up to a pistol. Out here, everyone needs to know how to defend themselves, Dutch said as Elsie lined up her shot. Man, woman, or child, the land doesn't care which you are. She got good at it. Not expert, but competent. Enough that Caleb trusted her to carry a gun when she rode out to check fence lines with the hands. Mrs. Ashford visited twice more during those 6 months, each time finding little to criticize but never quite approving either. She was a woman who seemed to believe that approval would make her irrelevant, so she kept finding small things to note in her reports. The child spends too much time with the ranch hands. The child's education is informal and inconsistent. The married couple maintains separate bedrooms. Cross dealt with each report, contextualizing, explaining, defending. It was exhausting. Meanwhile, Vivian hadn't given up. She sent letters to the court claiming that Caleb was keeping Elsie prisoner, that the child was being forced to work, that the whole situation was improper. Each letter was investigated and dismissed, but they kept coming. "She's trying to wear us down," Rosa said one evening, reading the latest complaint. "Make us so tired of fighting that we give in." "She doesn't know us very well then," Caleb replied. But Elsie could see the toll it was taking. Caleb looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper. Rosa's hands were never still anymore, always working, always moving, like if she stopped she'd have to think about what might happen. And Elsie herself had nightmares. Not every night, but often enough. Dreams of being back on that frozen trail, watching the wagon disappear. Dreams of standing in a courtroom while the judge handed her back to Vivian. Dreams where she ran and ran but couldn't find the ranch, couldn't find home. She never told Caleb or Rosa about the nightmares. They had enough to worry about. The final hearing was set for late July, 6 months almost to the day after the first one. This time, they knew what to expect. Cross prepared them thoroughly, mock interviews and practice questions, anticipating every argument Whitmore might make. "They're going to claim the provisional period proves the arrangement is working," Cross said. "That Vivian has reformed, settled down, demonstrated stability. They'll argue that blood relations should prevail now that the immediate danger has passed." "What immediate danger?" Rosa asked. "Vivian tried to kill her. That's your argument. Theirs is that it was a misunderstanding during a time of grief, and since nothing else has happened in 6 months, maybe it really was just a terrible mistake." "You believe that?" Caleb asked. "No, but I don't have to. The judge does." They rode to town on a hot summer morning, the sky clear and blue, the air thick with dust and grasshoppers. The courthouse looked the same as it had 6 months ago, but somehow more ominous. Inside, Vivian and Porter were already seated. Vivian looked different. Her clothes were nicer, her hair styled, her face carefully composed into an expression of maternal concern. Porter wore a new suit and had shaved his beard. They were playing the part of respectable citizens. Cross noticed it too. "They've been coached. Someone taught them how to look legitimate." The hearing began the same way the first one had, with Whitmore making his case. But this time, he had evidence. Letters from Vivian's employer praising her work ethic. Testimony from her landlord about what good tenants they were. A statement from a minister who'd counseled them on proper child rearing. It was all very convincing if you didn't know it was built on lies. "Your Honor," Whitmore said, "the Porters have demonstrated exactly the kind of reformation and stability the court was looking for. They've built a life in Helena. They have steady income, a proper home, and a genuine desire to reunite with Elsie and provide her with the guidance only a mother can give." Morrison looked less irritated than he had 6 months ago, more considering. "Mr. Cross?" Cross stood. "Your Honor, nothing has changed except Mrs. Porter's appearance. She's still the same woman who abandoned a child in the wilderness. New clothes and a job don't erase that." "People can change, Mr. Cross. Some people, but I question whether 6 months is enough time for that kind of fundamental transformation." He pulled out his own papers. "The Mercers have provided stability, education, and genuine care. Elsie has thrived under their guardianship. The court-appointed representatives' reports confirm this." "They also note concerns," Morrison said. "Minor concerns? Irregularities of lifestyle, not failures of care. The ranch is unconventional, yes, but it's also safe, productive, and filled with people who genuinely care about that child's welfare." Morrison looked at Vivian. "Mrs. Porter, you've heard the testimony about your stepdaughter's condition when she was found. The bruises, the malnutrition, the fear. How do you account for that?" Vivian stood, her voice steady. "Your Honor, I was a grieving widow struggling to survive a difficult journey. I made mistakes. I was too harsh with discipline, too focused on just getting through each day. I'm not proud of that. But I've had 6 months to reflect, to grow, to understand what I did wrong. I want the chance to make it right." It was a good answer, measured, self-aware without being overly apologetic. Cross stood up. "Your Honor, may I cross-examine?" Briefly, Cross approached Vivian. "Mrs. Porter, you say you want to make things right. Can you tell the court Elsie's favorite food?" Vivian blinked. Excuse me?" "Her favorite food. If you spent months traveling with her, caring for her, surely you know what she likes to eat. I don't see how that's relevant. Answer the question. Stew, I believe. She always ate the stew.
Wrong. She hates stew. Makes her sick. Cross didn't wait for a response. What about her mother? Do you know her mother's name? Sarah, I think. Samuel mentioned it once. Catherine. Her name was Catherine. Cross's voice was cutting now. You claim to have cared for this child, to want to reunite with her, but you don't know basic facts about her life. You can't even remember the name of the woman whose daughter you supposedly love.
Vivian's composure cracked slightly. I told you it was a difficult time. It's been 6 months, Mrs. Porter. Plenty of time to learn these things if you actually cared. Cross turned to the judge. Your Honor, this woman doesn't want Elsie. She wants to punish the Mercers for exposing her cruelty. She wants money, leverage, something she can use. But she does not want that child. Objection! Whitmore was on his feet. Mr. Cross is speculating.
I'm observing, Cross said, and I challenge Mrs. Porter to prove otherwise. Let her spend 5 minutes with Elsie. Just 5 minutes. Let's see if she can even pretend to care. Morrison considered this. That's an unusual request. These are unusual circumstances. Your Honor, we object strongly, Whitmore said. This is a legal proceeding, not a test of affection.
I think it's a fine idea, Morrison said. He looked at Vivian. Mrs. Porter, are you willing to speak with your stepdaughter? Just a brief conversation? Vivian's eyes darted to Porter, then to Whitmore, both of whom looked uncomfortable. Of course, if it will help the court decide. Good. Bailiff, bring the girl forward. Elsie walked to the front of the courtroom, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for it. Morrison gestured to an area near the bench. You two can talk here. We'll all observe, but we won't interfere. Go ahead. Vivian and Elsie stood facing each other. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Vivian said, her voice careful, Hello, Elsie. You look well. I am well. I'm glad to hear it. I've missed you. It was such an obvious lie that Elsie almost laughed, but she kept her face neutral. Have you? Of course. You're my stepdaughter, my family. You left me in the snow. Vivian's expression flickered. I was confused, grieving. I've explained this. You told me I ate too much, that I was worthless, that you didn't owe me anything. Elsie's voice was steady, no fear in it now. Those aren't the words of someone who's confused. Those are the words of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Elsie, please. You're not sorry you left me. You're sorry you got caught. Elsie looked directly into Vivian's eyes. And if the judge gives me back to you, you'll just do it again. Maybe not the same way. Maybe you won't leave me on a trail, but you'll get rid of me somehow, because you don't want a daughter. You never did. Vivian's face hardened, the mask slipping. You ungrateful little... She caught herself, but it was too late. Everyone in the courtroom had seen it, the flash of real hatred, the barely contained anger. Vivian tried to recover. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... It's been very stressful. But the damage was done. Morrison waved them both back. I've seen enough. Thank you, Elsie. You can return to your seat. Elsie walked back to sit between Caleb and Rosa, her legs shaking but her head high. Morrison shuffled his papers, then looked up at the assembled crowd. I'm going to be honest with all of you. This case has troubled me from the beginning. The law says blood relations have priority. The law says a child belongs with their family, but the law also says I have to consider the welfare of the child above all else. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Mrs. Porter, I want to believe you've changed. I want to believe that 6 months of stability has made you a better person. But what I just witnessed tells me otherwise. The way you looked at that child, the way you spoke to her, that's not love. That's not even basic human decency. That's resentment. Vivian started to object, but Morrison held up his hand. I'm not finished. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, your arrangement is unconventional. There are legitimate questions about whether a working ranch is the best place for a young girl. But you know what? I've read every report Mrs. Ashford filed, and despite her concerns, one thing is consistent. That child is healthy, educated, and safe. She's thriving. He looked at Elsie. Young lady, stand up. Elsie stood. Do you want to stay with the Mercers? Yes, sir. Even knowing it might not be easy? That people will talk? That there will be challenges? Yes, sir. Because they chose me when nobody else would, and that matters more than anything else. Morrison nodded slowly. Sit down. He looked at his papers one more time, then set them aside. Here's my ruling. Full custody of Elsie Rowan is hereby granted to Caleb and Rosa Mercer. All parental rights of Vivian Porter are permanently terminated. Mrs. Porter, you are forbidden from contacting the child or attempting to see her without express written permission from the Mercers. Vivian shot to her feet. You can't do this. She's nothing to you, Morrison said coldly. And after what I just witnessed, I'm confident in my decision. If you attempt to contact her, you'll be held in contempt of court. Do you understand? Vivian's face was purple with rage. This is a travesty. You're letting that man... Bailiff, escort Mrs. Porter from the courtroom. Hearing dismissed. The gavel came down hard, final. Vivian screamed something as the bailiff took her arm, but Elsie couldn't hear it over the ringing in her ears. It was over. Really over. Porter grabbed Whitmore's arm, hissing something angry, but the lawyer just shook his head and started packing his papers. There was nothing more to be done. Caleb's hand came down on Elsie's shoulder, steady and warm. Rosa's arm wrapped around her waist. They stood together as the courtroom slowly emptied, people congratulating them or just nodding respectfully as they passed. Cross appeared beside them, a rare smile on his face. Congratulations. She's yours now, legally and permanently. Thank you, Caleb said, shaking the lawyer's hand, for everything. You did the hard part. I just pointed the judge in the right direction. Cross looked at Elsie. You were very brave in there. I just told the truth. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. He tipped his hat and left. They walked out of the courthouse into bright summer sunshine. The ranch hands were waiting again, and this time the cheer that went up was pure celebration. It's done? Dutch asked. It's done, Caleb confirmed. She's ours. Dutch grinned and clapped Caleb on the shoulder. About time you got something right, boss. The ride back to the ranch was different this time. Lighter. Elsie sat between Caleb and Rosa in the wagon, watching the Montana landscape roll by, and for the first time since her father died, she felt like the future was something to look forward to instead of something to survive. That night they had a celebration. Nothing fancy. Just the ranch hands gathering in the dining hall, Rosa cooking everyone's favorite foods, Dutch breaking out the good whiskey he'd been saving. Someone produced a fiddle and someone else a harmonica, and before long there was music filling the warm summer night. Tommy tried to teach Elsie to dance, and she stepped on his feet repeatedly, but he just laughed and kept trying. Caleb stood at the edge of the room watching, and Rosa came to stand beside him. You did it, she said quietly. You saved her. We did it, you and me both. Rosa looked at him. You know this changes everything. We're parents now, really parents, not just on paper. I know. Are you ready for that? Caleb watched Elsie laughing as she spun in a clumsy circle with Tommy. I don't know, but I'm going to try. Rosa's hand found his. They stood there holding hands like an actual married couple for the first time since the ceremony, and somehow it didn't feel strange. It felt right. The summer passed into fall. Elsie turned 11 in October, and Rosa made her a cake with real sugar and candles. The whole ranch celebrated, the hands giving her small gifts. A new rope from Tommy, a pocket knife from Marcus, a book of frontier stories from Dutch. Caleb gave her a horse. It was a young mare, brown with white socks, gentle but spirited. She's yours, Caleb said. You name her, you care for her, you learn to ride her properly. That's your responsibility now. Elsie named her Star, after the white marking on her forehead, and spent every spare moment in the barn learning how to properly care for an animal that was hers and hers alone. Winter came again, but this time Elsie wasn't afraid of it. The ranch was prepared, supplies stocked, animals sheltered. She spent the cold months learning to read better, helping Rosa with increasingly complex recipes, listening to the hands tell stories around the fire. One evening, a year and a half after Caleb had found her on that frozen trail, Elsie sat in the kitchen while Rosa mended clothes and Caleb went over ranch accounts. Rosa? Elsie said quietly. Yes, mija? Can I ask you something? Always. Why did you really agree to marry Caleb? I know you said it was to protect me, but was that the only reason? Rosa set down her mending and thought about that. At first, yes. That was the only reason. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. Not romantic love, maybe, but partnership, respect, caring about someone's welfare as much as your own. She looked at Caleb. We became a family, real family. Not because the law said so, but because we chose it. Caleb looked up from his papers. You regretting it? Not even a little bit, Rosa said. You? No. He smiled slightly. Turns out being married to you isn't as terrible as I expected. Rosa threw a sock at him. He caught it and threw it back. Elsie watched them, these two people who'd rearranged their entire lives for her sake, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Not the fear that had lived there for so long, not the constant readiness to run or fight or prove herself, just peace. She belonged here. Really belonged. Not because she'd earned it or because she was useful, but because two broken people had decided she was worth saving and then proved it every single day. Elsie, Caleb said, pulling her from her thoughts, next week I'm running cattle to the North Range. You want to come along? It's a 3-day ride. Really? Really? Time you learned that part of the business. Dutch and Tommy will be there, so you won't be the only young one. Elsie's face split into a grin. Yes, absolutely yes. Good. Rosa will get you kitted out proper. Can't have you freezing on the trail. That night, Elsie lay in her bed looking out at the stars. The same stars that had watched her nearly die on a frozen trail now watched her safe and warm in a real home with real family. She thought about Vivian sometimes, wondered if the woman ever regretted what she'd done, or if she'd just moved on to her next scheme, her next victim. It didn't matter anymore. Vivian had no power here, no claim, no ability to hurt her. Elsie had won. Not by being perfect, not by being easy or convenient or exactly what anyone expected, but by being stubborn enough to survive and honest enough to tell the truth when it mattered. And she'd found people who were just as stubborn, just as honest, just as unwilling to give up. Spring came again. The ranch burst into life with new calves, fresh grass, and the endless work of a Montana cattle operation. Elsie rode out with the hands, learning to rope and brand, to read the land and the weather, to understand the business side of ranching as well as the practical. She grew taller, stronger, more confident. The nightmares faded. The constant wariness in her eyes softened into something closer to peace. One afternoon in early summer, 2 years after that first courtroom hearing, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was well-dressed, official-looking, carrying a leather satchel. Elsie's first instinct was fear, but Caleb came out of the barn, saw the man, and relaxed slightly. "Help you?" Caleb called. "Looking for Caleb Mercer. I'm from the Territorial Land Office. Got some papers that need signing. Not a threat. Just business." Elsie returned to helping Marcus in the barn, but she noticed Rosa watching from the kitchen window, always vigilant, always ready to fight if necessary. That vigilance had become part of their family dynamic. Not paranoia, but awareness. Understanding that the world could be cruel and random and unfair, but facing it anyway. Later that evening, after the stranger had left and the ranch had settled down for the night, Caleb called Elsie into his study. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Elsie sat, curious. Caleb pulled out a paper and pushed it across to her. "You're old enough now to understand this. That was a land deed. I've been buying up parcels around the ranch, expanding our range, and I've been thinking about the future." "Okay?" "I'm putting your name on the deed. When I die, this ranch goes to you and Rosa. Equal shares." Elsie stared at him. "What?" "You're my daughter. This is your home. Your inheritance. I want that in writing so there's no question when the time comes." "Caleb, this isn't up for debate. Rosa and I talked about it. We both agree. You've worked for this place just like everyone else. You've earned your stake in it." Elsie's eyes burned. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just understand that you're not temporary. You're not a guest. You're family. Permanent family." He paused. "And when you're old enough, if you want to change your last name to Mercer, legally, we can do that too." "Really? Really? You think about it. No rush." Elsie didn't need to think about it. "I want to. I want to be Elsie Mercer." Caleb's expression softened in a way it rarely did. "All right then. We'll make it happen." That night, Elsie sat on the porch with Rosa, watching the sun set over the Montana hills. "He told you about the deed," Rosa said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." "Good. You deserve to know your future is secure." "Rosa, why did all this happen? Why did Caleb find me that night instead of someone else? Why did everything work out when it could have gone so wrong?" Rosa was quiet for a long time. "I don't know if there's a reason. Maybe it was just luck, good timing. Or maybe," she paused, "maybe broken people find each other sometimes. And when they do, they have a choice. They can stay broken, or they can try to fix each other. Is that what we did?" "I think so. Caleb lost his first family and thought he'd never have another. I lost my chance at children of my own years ago, and you lost everything." Rosa looked at her. "But we found each other, and we decided to build something new from all those broken pieces. It's not perfect. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it doesn't look like what other people think a family should look like. But it's ours." Elsie leaned against Rosa's shoulder. "I'm glad he found me." "So am I, mija, so am I." Years passed. Elsie grew into a young woman who could work a cattle drive as well as any man, manage ranch finances with the precision Rosa had taught her, and negotiate deals with buyers who underestimated her until she proved them wrong. She never forgot where she came from, never forgot that cold trail, the wolves, the feeling of being thrown away like trash, but she didn't let it define her anymore. Instead, she let it fuel her, made her stronger, sharper, more determined, made her the kind of person who noticed when others were struggling and offered help without being asked. The ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its size and success, but for something else, for taking in travelers during bad winters, for hiring men nobody else would hire, men with pasts, with scars, with stories they didn't want to tell. "We don't turn away people who need help," Caleb explained to a new hand one day. "That's not how we do things here." And everyone knew why. Because the ranch itself had been built on the principle that some things mattered more than profit or convenience, that a person's worth wasn't measured in what they could produce or how useful they were, that sometimes the hardest and most important thing you could do was see someone everyone else had given up on and decide they were worth fighting for. On a spring morning when Elsie was 17, she stood on the ridge overlooking the ranch, the same ridge where Caleb had first spotted her through his rifle scope all those years ago. The land stretched out below her, vast and beautiful and harsh. Cattle dotted the fields. Smoke rose from the ranch house chimneys. In the distance, she could see Dutch and Tommy moving horses between corrals. Caleb rode up beside her, his hair more gray now, his face lined with the years. But his eyes were still sharp, still determined. "You come up here a lot," he said. "I like the view. You can see everything from here. That's why I chose this spot that night. Good vantage point." He was quiet for a moment. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I'd ridden past? If I hadn't stopped?" "Sometimes, but not as much as I used to." "Why not?" Elsie turned to look at him. "Because you didn't ride past. You stopped. You saved me, and that choice changed everything. Not just for me, but for all of us." Caleb nodded slowly. "You know what I see when I look at you now?" "What?" "A fighter. Someone who refused to quit even when the whole world told her she wasn't worth the trouble. That's rare. That's valuable." He smiled slightly. "That's my daughter." The words still caught her sometimes, still made her chest tight with emotion. Not because they were new, but because they were true. She was his daughter. Not by blood, not by the traditional path of birth and biology, but by choice, by the daily decision to show up, to care, to fight for each other. And that, Elsie had learned, was more powerful than any bond of blood could ever be. "Come on," Caleb said, turning his horse. "Rosa's making breakfast, and you know how she gets if we're late." They rode down the ridge together, father and daughter and everything that mattered, heading toward the warmth and noise and life of the ranch below. Behind them, the sun rose over the Montana frontier, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire, lighting the way forward. And Elsie Mercer, who'd once been a child nobody wanted, rode toward her future with her head high and her heart full, surrounded by the family she'd fought for and the home she'd earned. Not because life had been easy or fair, but because she'd survived. She'd persisted. She'd refused to let cruelty and abandonment write the end of her story. And in the end, that had made all the difference.